Hello Internet! Welcome to another episode of Romney's Reviews. As you can see, I now have a fancy new backdrop behind me, finally moving on up in the world, but let's not waste any more time and get straight to the subject of this review, Dredd. Now, my familiarity with this character is very, very limited, but here's what I do know about him. 1, he was created in Great Britain for the magazine 2000 AD. 2, he never removes his helmet in the comics, even when he removes it in the story, his face is always obscured. And 3, the events of the comic series in Britain progress in real time, so when a year passes in the real world, a year is also passed in the comics, and the characters are aged accordingly. So instead of being like Spider-Man, who's essentially a teenager forever, Dredd has actually aged. From what I've read online, he's currently like 80 years old in the comic. Who knew? The story of this film, it's dark, it's gritty, and it's violent, but it's also unique. It kind of takes examples of it pretty much takes pages from like a noir crime drama, layers it with a war film, and a survival film. Basically, those are the 3 major things I picked up on. It was about crime, war, and trying to survive. And, well, best way I can say about the story is that it's very unique and feels a lot like what I've read about the comics, as well as the brief snippets I've read in the free comic book day edition of 2000 AD. And I like how it isn't trying to be like The Dark Knight or any other comic book movies that have come out this year, and instead just trying to be unique in and of itself. Which is probably also helped by the fact that this is produced by a British studio instead of an American studio. I'm not saying that American studios can't do a good job, but I'm just saying when it comes to a character that isn't actually an American character, they should probably leave it alone, is all I'm saying. You can tell that a lot of the imagery is catered to the 3D because it's also released in 3D. Now, I saw the 2D version, but even I was able to tell that there's certain things that were meant to be seen in 3D. But unlike a lot of other 3D films where they have the things like flying at you, it combines with the atmospheric as well as kind of turning it into more of a horrifying experience, and it manages to actually make those segments part of the overall style and story of the film. Even with the stuff that doesn't require slow-mo, there's still a lot of scenes that feel like they're taken out of a comic book. A lot of key images and everything. And one thing that I also like, this is on part of both the writing, visuals, and just the story overall, is that it takes a lot of moments that you can tell a lot of people would expect to be in the film, like for example, like phrases like "I am the law," and it basically takes moments and it does have him say that, but it has him say it in a very serious and gruff sort of sense instead of kind of the "you betrayed the law" sort of thing. And it's almost like as if they were saying like, yeah, he's saying it, but he's not yelling it. This is how you're supposed to do it, Stallone. That's just kind of how it felt to me. So the acting in this film is actually, well, it's really well done. Karl Urban is a very good Judge Dredd. He's pretty much kind of gives it the nice, gruff, battle-hardened, somewhat subdued role that it is. It's essentially like a sci-fi version of Dirty Harry, which is how the character was designed. And Olivia Thirlby, at least if I am pronouncing her name right, she does a great job as Anderson. Now, again, I haven't read a lot of the comics, but just from what I've seen, she manages to make the character not, and this is both probably on her part and on part of the writing, she's not the typical character that you think is the weakling that is suddenly like Deus Ex Machina badass. She's a pretty well-rounded character, and she gives a very well-rounded performance. The character goes through its own story arc and actually has its own moments of moments of badassery, which is what I really liked. Now the villain, talk about a creepy villain. I don't know. I really liked her as a villain because she wasn't like a completely over-the-top like most superhero villains. And she wasn't completely subdued like certain other villains, where they either try to go, oh, it's got to be all over the top, all exaggerated, like the whole or it's not like the whole subdued thing. It's like, hey, I'm such and such playing the villain. She managed to find a nice thing where it's just like, yeah, she's got everything under control, and she's also crazy. To summarize, the story feels like it's very true to the source material. Feels like a noir crime drama mixed with a war film and a survival film. The writing takes a lot of things that a lot of people would expect to hear and actually makes things delivered serious and natural instead of going over the top like the Stallone movie. The cinematography and the overall visual aesthetic of the film feels like something out of a comic book, but not in the sense where it tries to shove it in your face. It's a very visually pleasing film, and it's interesting to look at and has a lot of cool imagery that you could almost take out and make a photo comic out of. And the acting is also really well done. So point being, if you were to try to make a comparison between Judge Dredd starring Sylvester Stallone from 1995 and Dredd with Carl Urban, there's no comparison. Dredd wins. With that said, on my personal scale, I'm giving Dredd a 4 out of 5. Now, the reason I'm giving it a 4 out of 5, like I've explained in an article that I'll be linking in the description, it is a very violent and dark movie. It's not something that can necessarily be enjoyed by everyone, but only by people who are really into science fiction, crime dramas, war films, or fans of the character. It's not a very universally appealing film, but I still found it incredibly enjoyable, both as a film and as an adaptation, because again, I've researched the character moderately enough. My dad did get me some comics, but they were from the DC series. From what I've heard, the DC series isn't faithful to the original 2000 AD comics at all, so take that what you will. But yeah, point being, Dredd is a great movie. And it's a comic book movie that feels less like Dark Knight or Avengers, but more kind of like, well, Sin City. Takes essentially one of the darker things in comics and gives it an adaptation that does it justice. And so, yeah, that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Next week, Looper. See you then. Yeah, I'm kind of excited. I mean, look at this thing. I mean, yeah. No longer is there going to be a bunch of cluttered junk in the background. Of course, it means no more sight gags, but it's a backdrop. I mean, really.